So 5 Jews were playing poker one night when Meyerowitz loses 500 on a single hand, stands up, clutches his chest, and drops dead on the floor. Bash looks around and asks, "Now who's going to tell his wife?" They drew straws. Nordheim was always the loser. He picks the short one. They tell him to be discreet, be gentle. Don't make a bad situation any worse than it is. "Gentlemen, discreet. I'm the most discreet mensch you will ever meet. Discretion is my middle name. Leave it to me." So Nordheim schleps over to the Meyerowitz apartment, knocks on the door. The wife answers, asks what he wants, and Nordheim declares, "Your husband just lost $500 and is afraid to come home." She hollers, "Tell him he should drop dead." Nordheim says, "I'll tell him." Okay, I saved the greatest hits for... Sometimes there's no way you can soft pedal bad news, and it's not so easy today. Today we're marking on the Jewish calendar the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War. In Israel, this is a time of profound reflection and concern. In fact, there are some parallels between that week in 1973 and how many Jews feel right now. Back then, as the war began, reports from the front were patchy, but word was getting around. Israel was in real peril. The Egyptians had broken through in the Sinai and the Syrians in the Golan. The Syrians had a clear path to cut the Galilee in two, which would have effectively been the end of Israel. It was only through the extraordinary courage of Israeli tank crews and some dumb luck that the state survived just long enough for the IDF to turn the tide and the Nixon administration to come through with much needed assistance. 50 years ago, Israel survived a truly existential threat, an external threat. There's another anniversary that we've been commemorating this month. 30 years ago, the first Oslo Accord was signed on the White House lawn. At the time, many thought it would be a turning point in history, and it was, but not in a good way. It led to another existential moment that nearly tore Israel apart, the assassination of Prime Minister Rabin 2 years later, followed by the Second Intifada. So these are sobering anniversaries, especially because Israel faces an existential threat today as well. Several, really, but none more than the judicial reforms that are being promoted by the government. There's a legitimate concern that Israel's future hangs in the balance. In the opinion of 2/3 of the population, there's a real chance that this could even end up in civil war. They're talking about that in those terms. There was a survey this summer. 58% of Israelis believe that Israel is on the verge of economic, social, and political collapse because of the judicial overhaul. And that's where the parallels between now and 1973 diverge. Back then, the Jewish world rallied behind a slogan that would almost seem ludicrous now: "We are one." "Teach us to count our days," says Psalm 90, "that we may attain wisdom." But right now, the Jewish people can't even count to one. Who knows one? We certainly don't. We don't know it as Jews. We don't really know it as Americans either. The concept of unity has gone the way of the dinosaur. For the first time in all my years in the rabbinate, I see the real possibility of a rupture of world Jewry. And I don't think many American Jews have any idea of what our Israeli cousins have been going through this year, and how there is a real fear that they are teetering on the precipice of a non-democratic theocracy with no checks and balances. It's truly remarkable what a grassroots resistance movement has accomplished, led by distinctly apolitical figures like Shikma Bressler, a physicist and mother of five, who's emerged as a symbol of defiance of the government's judicial overhaul. She's decidedly not a politician, and she is decidedly not left-wing. And neither are the protests, which have adopted as their rallying symbol the Israeli flag. At these protests, participants span the full diversity of the Israeli people, Jewish and Palestinian, religious and secular, gay and straight, Ashkenazi and Mizrahi, and everything in between. And they all understand what this is about. An independent court is all that stands between a moral society aspiring to protect human rights, however imperfectly, and an extremist agenda supporting the visions of Meir Kahane, Baruch Goldstein, and Yigal Amir, the three most notorious Jews in the history of the state, whose faces were on posters at a recent pro-government rally. When Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir were invited into positions of power, it was the equivalent of bringing the KKK into the US cabinet. And then the decision was made to remove the one remaining obstacle preventing them from doing whatever they want. There is no real check on the government other than the judiciary. In April, Justice Minister Yariv Levin admitted that elements of his plan would, quote, end democracy, unquote, because it would essentially give the coalition unfettered power. That admission, with a country already seething, confirmed the suspicions of many that this had never been about fine-tuning the judiciary. It was a project much more nefarious. So that's why these unprecedented protests are happening. Now let me explain why they matter to us. In the words of Yuval Noah Harari, the best-selling author of *Sapiens*, he said, "Imagine a world in which Judaism becomes a synonym for religious fanaticism and brutal oppression. Could Judaism survive such a spiritual destruction?" That's the world that would inevitably result from the dismantling of the judiciary. Another columnist, B. Michael, known as Israel's most sardonic commentator, put in even more startling terms. He said, "Diaspora Jews, stay where you are. Don't make aliyah." Can you imagine an Israeli saying that? Ben-Gurion would be turning over. He said, "The torch is being passed to you. From now on, you are the keepers of the flame. You're in charge of proving the existence of a sane version of the Jewish people. You're responsible for maintaining a rendering of Judaism that is not shameful." Are you shocked yet? For the most part, unless you immerse yourself in Israeli media like I do, or read Thomas Friedman religiously, you can't grasp how dire this moment is. If you aren't paying attention, you don't realize that this is not just a panic-stricken hyperventilation by Israel's left. You just need to follow what this government is saying in Hebrew, where it talks less about Jewish security and more out loud about Jewish supremacy. It cozies up to the illiberal extremists in Romania, Hungary, Turkey, Poland, and of course here. And even with Iran presenting a grave danger, setting up attack bases within several miles of Israel's northern border, the government forges ahead with a plan to curb the courts and subvert the media, all with their eyes on the bigger prize of annexation, theocracy, and driving the Arabs out. But there is hope. I wasn't about to stand up here, my next to last sermon, and say there's no hope. But that hope is real, and it resides in the spirit of the people who have taken to the streets every week for this whole year. Almost 40 weeks so far. Every week, Hundreds of thousands of people have taken to the streets. Thomas Friedman, who has seen every democracy protest of the past half century, from Beirut to Berlin to Moscow to Cairo, Hong Kong, Kiev in 2014, he said, "I've never seen something like the Israeli Democracy Protectors Movement." He said, more than a half year of tens of thousands of people, center left and center right, coming from a broad swath of the population, turning out every Saturday night to resist a judicial coup and managing to appropriate the national flag and national anthem as their symbols. He prodded American Jews to do something we really don't like to do, and that is choose sides. Yuval Noah Harari speaks of two kinds of Judaism, symbolized by the two most noteworthy Jews alive today whose paths crossed this week at the UN. There's Netanyahu Judaism and there's Zelensky Judaism. Volodymyr Zelensky is never ashamed to call himself a Jew, even as he lives in a place where Jews have been murdered so often in the past. But he's also a proud Ukrainian, fearless, human, relatable. He looks at the world in a very Jewish way, pursuing justice and fighting corruption and hate. Yuval Noah Harari points to Huwara, the West Bank village attacked this year, following a terror incident where 2 Jews were killed at a gas station. And it should be noted, there have been more and more terror incidents directed against Jews in Israel and in the territories. But the reprisal was beyond shocking. Scores of people took revenge on the entire town in a night-long rampage, setting dozens of cars and homes on fire, and the authorities were nowhere to be found. And a video went viral where a crowd of Jewish extremists stood in prayer, while staring at a building that they had set aflame and praying the Kaddish, not the mourner's Kaddish, just a Kaddish. They were davening Mariv, thanking God. It's been compared to a pogrom, and not without reason. And I should mention the little detail that before this attack occurred, Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, had said, "I think the village of Huwara needs to be wiped out. I think the state of Israel should do it." Let that marinate for a second. This was a government-supported pogrom. Harari wrote, "It's a historical irony that just when in Huwara, Jews are behaving like Cossacks, in Ukraine, the descendants of Cossacks have chosen the Jewish Zelensky to lead them at their moment of ultimate crisis. Zelensky's Ukraine proves to the world that patriotism, democracy, Judaism, and commitment to universal values get along fine together." Harari believes that Zelensky's Judaism is closer to our Judaism than Netanyahu's, and I'm inclined to agree. For one thing, only one of these two leaders is on trial right now for bribery, fraud, breach of trust. And it ain't Zelensky who's out to root out corruption, who's actually fired many of his ministers, even in the midst of a life and death war. This moment reminds us that Israel belongs to all the Jewish people. It is ours to shape and critique and protect. For the first time, Israelis, who typically have asked diaspora Jews to butt out of its internal affairs, are begging us to come in, to be active participants. This is an internal struggle, but we're part of the internal. We're part of the family. Last Rosh Hashanah, I gave a sermon on how we need to love Israel as one would love a family member. Indeed, as we have always loved America, despite this country's shortcomings. And I talked about the song, Ein Li Eretz Acheret, I Have No Other Country, which was once again this year voted one of the top songs of Israel's 75 years and became a theme song for the protests. It's an all-purpose song for rough times, and by singing it, people are proclaiming that they are not giving up. that we are not giving up on Theodore Herzl's dream. We cannot give up either. I've stood here countless times talking so lovingly about Israel, and I love it not one iota less than when I arrived. But when elements of the government are on the cusp of doing something so dangerous, so anti-democratic, so power-hungry, we have to stop making excuses for it. We have to insist that our American Jewish organizations stand up for democracy at the hour of greatest need. Daniel Gordis, who spoke here, he is no left-winger. He's often defending Netanyahu. He's spoken at many of the major conventions of all the big organizations. He is an icon of the Israeli center. He said recently, one day, grandchildren will ask their grandparents what they did right now to save Israel's democracy. Teach us to count our days by teaching us how to stand up and be counted, to be courageous, to never be afraid. We have to love Israel enough to want Israel and the U.S. to be better. And we want them to be united, to be one. Teach us, O God, to learn how to count to one. But sometimes in order to count to one, we need to begin with two slightly different parties. We have to cultivate our own brand of Judaism. Not the Netanyahu brand, not the Zelensky brand either, which out of necessity has lost much of its Jewish content, though we are seeing a renaissance of Jewish life in Eastern Europe. We need to be bold in cultivating our own brand of Judaism here in America, here at Bethel, a Judaism steeped in values of menschlichkeit, enriched by our history, inspired by the resilience of prior generations, humbled and steeled by the Holocaust, seasoned by American pluralism and religious diversity, challenged by intellectual honesty and the clarion call for social justice. Very serious, but also a whole lot of fun. And proud, proud, proud. That's TBE Judaism, as we have envisioned it over the decades. That's the vision I've tried to propagate. And that's the model that we still need to present to the world. And I hope you will continue to do that. Gone are the days when Israelis would smugly say, as the novelist A.B. Yehoshua once did, that American Jews only play with Jewishness while Israelis live it every day. Yeah, they do live it every day and aren't doing a great job of it. But we are no longer on the sidelines of the struggle to build a Jewish future. We've begun playing some home games in our own sandbox, and we've gotten pretty good at it. By separating ourselves from a distorted, bizarro version of Judaism, we can help to forge a Judaism that will bring secular and traditional Israelis to understand that a pogrom in Huara is not the only option. That is not Judaism. American Jews and Israelis need to understand that by some miracle, the Jewish people returned to our homeland after 2,000 years, and at the exact same time, we've created the most successful diaspora community ever. And now we can help strengthen Israelis' vision by unabashedly proclaiming the vibrancy of ours. And that's how division will help achieve unity. By being two proud communities, we can forge one Jewish people. 1 + 1 = 1. Despite all that has torn us apart, I remain optimistic. And here are a couple of reasons why. On a WhatsApp group, someone asked to borrow an Israeli flag for a pro-reform rally in Jerusalem to be held on Thursday night. Someone replies, sure, no problem, but he needs it back for the anti-reform rally to be held right after Shabbat. Perfect Israeli situation. Of course, replies the guy, and they say thank you, and that's it. Only in Israel, because beneath all the acrimony, there is family. And beneath all the seething anger, we are part of the same mishpacha. It begins with symbolism. Everyone is patriotic. Everyone is using that same flag. For Palestinian Israelis, it's a little more complicated, but the unity is more conceivable when you're embracing the same symbols. Visually, you can't really tell which side is which. And there was another incident this summer that was widely publicized, fascinating. It was a touching moment. It was captured in a video taken at Jerusalem's Yitzhak Navon train station. The clip showed protesters crowded on the long escalators at the station. One long staircase just going up and one even longer coming down, you know? So half of them had been at the anti-reform demonstration in Jerusalem, and they were descending the platforms leading away from the Capitol. And those coming back from the large pro-reform rally in Tel Aviv were ascending on their way back. So going up and going down, more kippot on one side, more t-shirts on the other, but basically all with flags. They resembled each other in so many ways. Heading in different directions, they reached across the escalator and clasped hands. You see this on the video. How cool was that? There is, in the end, hope that we can count to one. I believe there is so much more that unites the Jewish people than divides us. So I've been focusing on Psalm 90 this week, but I want to take a little quick excursus, a little quick look at Psalm 133. Might have a familiar ring to it. It's a song of ascent, a song of pilgrimage. Hine matov umanayim, shevet achim. You know it, and you complete my sentences still. This is great. We're like a couple that's been together for God knows. How good and pleasant it is that kinfolk dwell together. It's a short psalm, but it's filled with imagery. It speaks of oil flowing on the beard of Aaron, the high priest, and the dew flowing from Mount Hermon in the north to the mountains of Zion in Jerusalem, where God ordains blessing and everlasting. This a little more closely. It's fascinating. First of all, what is the right melody for Hine Matov? Now, some of you might know Hine Matov Umanayim Shevet Achim, or Hine Matov Umanayim. That's the one we dance to. And you know, there's Hine Matov Umanayim. It's a Hasidic song festival. There's the one from bus rides that I couldn't find on YouTube, but I will tell you, you know, from all my USY days, you know, it was really off key. I put together over 30 YouTube clips and put them in one posting, and I will link it to you in my sermon notes. It goes from Reform to Renewal to Hasidic to Sephardic to Mizrahi, Leonard Bernstein's Chichester Psalms, even Harry Belafonte of blessed memory, who died this year. But here's the point. All over the world, they sing it in a different way. Throughout Jewish history, the words are exactly the same. Our spirits are stirred by precisely the same 3,000-year-old words, just with different melodies, and the sentiments are the same. Jews really do idealize unity. We want to get along. I agree that with very little that far-right Israelis would say. And some, many, all want to delegitimize me as a conservative rabbi, but I know that the ultra-Orthodox are especially terrified of Israel being split into two countries, and there are think tanks talking about this right now. It is being discussed, quasi and maybe more than that, seriously. It would not go well for their half, the half with no army, no economy, and no allies. On the other hand, we don't have God. Deep down, the people want unity, and that's half the battle. I told you this has good news. Unity with whom? Achim. Achim, says the psalm. Shevet Achim. Now, in modern Hebrew, the expression ach, achi, is like the English bro. But it's not really bro, because it's a bro you fought with in a war within the last 20 years, and probably more than one. Someone who fought alongside you is your achi. If you watch Fauda, if you watch any of the Israeli shows and you listen to the Hebrew, they use the word ach all the time. It's more than a friend. It's someone you would lay down your life for, because it's someone who in the foxhole has already done that, most likely, for you. And the word shevet means to dwell, but it also evokes the word, slightly different spelling, same sound, for tribe. So when Israel turned 71 a few years ago, a very popular song went viral, inspired by Psalm 133. This song was called Shevet Achim V'Achayot, a tribe of brothers and sisters, written by Idan Reichel, who is Israel's poster boy for diversity, and it's sung by 35 of Israel's best-known musicians. A country that adores Idan Reichel, and Israelis do, is not a country headed for civil war. I read a really nice Buddhist perspective on this psalm, because this psalm belongs to everyone. The unity spoken of here, Shevet Achim, transcends emotion, suggesting a belief that everyone counts, everyone matters, but you don't have to like them. Buddhists aren't so big on that necessarily, you know. I don't want to insult any Buddhists here. We always like our siblings. I mean, we don't always like our siblings, even if we love them. You know, that's the difference that's being drawn here. So the commentary states, the cultivation of loving kindness leads to a bone-deep realization that our lives have something to do with one another, that the constructs of us and them are just that, constructs. The deeper reality is we. And then Psalm 133 goes on to flesh that out with some distinct imagery, two in particular. One is Aaron, the high priest, anointed with olive oil, the symbol of peace, and Aaron himself is a symbol of peace in our tradition. He tried to find common ground at the golden calf, middleman in Moses' diplomacy with Pharaoh. Pirkei Avot says, be like Aaron who loves peace and pursues peace, rodef shalom. He had the ability to make peace, according to Midrash, one person at a time. And according to the Midrash, when Aaron heard that two people were fighting with each other, he would go to one and then go to the other. He was sort of like Kissinger before shuttle diplomacy. And when the two combatants would meet on the road without Aaron there, one would say to the other, forgive me for the offense I did to you. The other would say the same. Who knows what Aaron said to them or how much he paid them, that they could flip so dramatically. Aaron is a role model for reconciliation. And the psalm also speaks of the dew running from Mount Hermon to Mount Zion. This is one of the psalms of ascent, Shir HaMa'alot, sung by pilgrims heading to Jerusalem, to Zion. Mount Hermon is the northernmost part of the country on the border with Syria and Lebanon, 250 miles. It's as far away from Jerusalem as you can get and still be in the country. So imagine in ancient times the pilgrims would make their way to Jerusalem singing this song. And they would start up there near Tel Dan and the northern Galilee and pick up people along the route as they're coming down. Long trek. Plenty of time for a very diverse group to iron out their differences. Brilliant way to bring people together. And in ancient Israel, north and south were bitter foes, sort of like the U.S., north and south. But here in this situation, they would sing this song of love and sweetness, of dwelling and common quest, wending their way from the top of the country to the bottom, from one end of the land to the other, sort of like from Boston to Charleston, as it were, all the while singing, Hinei Ma Tov. I remember almost an identical situation, but we weren't walking, we were on buses. In 1987, one of my first memories here in Stamford, in December, we got on dozens and dozens of buses here at the JCC and went down to Washington for the Soviet Jewry March. 400,000 people came. It changed history at a time when Soviet Jewry was on the front pages and Gorbachev was visiting our country. It was an amazing day. And we rolled down, literally counting the cars on the New Jersey Turnpike. We rolled down and saw all the buses coming from everywhere, from New York, from Pennsylvania, from Wisconsin, from across the country, everyone converging on Washington, as it must have seemed in ancient times, in Jerusalem. No matter what our differences, we came together, we became one tribe. So imagine them arriving from that long trip to Zion. Rabbi Mark Gelman imagines it. He imagines thousands of pilgrims camped on the hillsides around the great temple in Jerusalem, campfires, thousands of them, singing and dancing, all vengefulness forgotten, all tribal conflicts forgiven. Each family is a part of a larger fire and a larger holiness. Such a gathering, such a vision is described by the psalmist as being both good, tov, and pleasing, naim. Hine ma tov uma naim. Pleasing to the senses. It's good because it's the highest thing. God deserves the highest praise. It's pleasing because just for a brief shining moment, we are all one. We are not divided. We are not at war. We see in our neighbor the source of our fulfillments, not the source of our limitations. Such a dwelling together for God is both a memory and a dream. These ancient pilgrimages must have been like a week of free therapy. Chance to come together and celebrate what unites us rather than what divides us. It's like, a Taylor Swift concert. And in Israel, music is a real unifier. Israelis love a good sing-along, and Hine ma tov has served that purpose for 3,000 years. Now, there's one more question that jumps out at me when looking at this psalm, and it has to do with the first word. All you need to say is ma tov. How good? It's good. Why the hine? Why the behold, it's good? Why behold, looky here? Is God saying it? Is God saying, hine, OMG, OM me? My kids, they're actually getting along. I love that when that happens. Or maybe the psalmist is echoing Abraham when he said when God called him to ascend to the same city, Hineni, I'm here, Abraham replied. Count me in. I am here for this pilgrimage. I am not a detached observer. I am a participant. I am here on Kaplan Street in Tel Aviv. I am here before the Supreme Court and the Knesset, and I'm here at Temple Bethel on Kol Nidre night. We're all in. And to quote a Leonard Cohen song that was inspired by the liturgy of the high holidays, which he conceived of while in Israel and in the Sinai during the 73 war, who shall I say is calling? 1,000 generations are calling. We have a homeland. We have a vibrant people. We have 2 vibrant homes. And these homes have been entrusted to us. We have diverse ways of being Jewish, of singing this song. The melodies are dramatically different, but the words are exactly the same. Behold, isn't it wonderful and pleasant for us to dwell here together as one? Even if the Jewish people are not really one, we can still imagine it. Sometimes a hopeful vision is all we've got. Sometimes a hopeful dream is all we need. 30 years ago, the tribes of Israel and the tribes of Ishmael met on the White House lawn in a beautiful mid-September afternoon. As Eric Alterman put it in his new book, We Are Not One, many Jewish tears were shed on the White House lawn that day, when during Prime Minister Rabin's speech, the usually blunt, unsentimental ex-general cried out to the Palestinian people, "We say to you today in a loud and clear voice, enough of blood and tears. Enough. We have no desire for revenge. We harbor no hatred toward you. We, like you, are people who want to build a home, to plant a tree, to love, to live side by side with you in dignity, in empathy, as human beings." This is the Israel that I love. This is a far cry from the incitement of Huwara Judaism. And we've heard these words before of rabbins: live side by side, shevet achim, gam yachad. Dwell as brothers and sisters. We'll live alongside you, not as estranged neighbors in a cold peace, not to burn down your villages and chase you away, but in empathy, in dignity, as human beings. And you will treat us the same way. Gam yachad, also in unity. Gam, also, gam. Me and you will live as neighbors, as family, in unity, as one. It takes two to become one. 1 + 1 = 1. Those words of rabbins may have been naive and they may have been illusory, not because they couldn't have borne fruit in a better world, but because bad actors were determined to make sure they wouldn't. Many people would die after Oslo on Egged buses, at the Dolphinarium, at Cafe Moment and Cafe Hillel, and the Hebrews Cafeteria and Sparrow Pizza, and in Jenin, Ramallah, Palestinian refugee camps, and Rabin himself, who became a martyr to hope with a blood-stained song of peace in his pocket. And every time someone makes a bold move for peace and unity, someone else tries to blow up those dreams. Still, we can never stop dreaming. For these dreams reflect the real Israel that I grew up believing in, the real Israel of the protesters today, the real Israel that can yet come into being, the real Israeli government that existed just a year ago and can again, a true unity government. It reflects the real Judaism that American Jews and Israelis can share, and it reflects the real America too. As divided as Israelis seem to be, and Americans too, a vast majority cherishes democratic values in both countries. We can build unity from that foundation. We can either fall into a very dark, extreme, racist place, where the Israel that we know and all its social and economic aspects will be destroyed, says Shikma Bressler, one of the leaders of the movement, the physicist, who is not a politician. Or we can build a new, stronger, better democracy for the good of all the people. As Elie Wiesel said in a speech delivered a couple of months after the '73 war, and a half century before the current Russian war on Ukraine, he said, "Never before have Jews been so organically linked to one another. Shout here and you will be heard in Kyiv. Shout in Kyiv and you'll be heard in Paris. When Jews are sad in Jerusalem, we are moved to tears everywhere. Thus a Jew lives in more than one place, in more than one era, on more than one level." Wiesel's vision may never have been realized except perhaps for those days and weeks in 1973, when everywhere Jews came together, including in this newly opened sanctuary without a carpet, and spontaneously emptied their hearts and their pockets. It happened then, and it could happen now. This year, it is happening in the streets of Israel, and maybe a true unity could be forged. We can't give up that hope, nor can we afford to be late to the game. Hinei ma tov, how wonderful they are, our Israeli achim, who have taken to the streets in song and in dance. They are waiting for us to join them. Who knows one? We know one. Teach us, O Adonai, to count to one. Amen.